Hey Punk Outlaw, it's Buddha Gem, and I've been wanting to do a video response to your video on capitalism. I think you did a two-part series, and basically I want to tackle the challenge you make in part two, where you say, and I'm going to quote you here, say, how do you make a society that doesn't allow for property and make that society entirely voluntary, with never having to force anybody into the situation? How do you tell someone they can't have property without being violent? If you explain that, feel free. And then you go on to say, ultimately, if I decide that I want more land than you deem fit, then you'll either have to use violence against me or accept that I have it. Those are your only two options. And you go on to point out that, of course, you could try to sway my view, but if you're being unfair, you're not going to sway me. So that's what I'm going to tackle. You make a lot of other good points in your video. The reason I want to tackle this is because I think it's so fundamental to the divide that we have, or maybe perhaps a misunderstanding. The state, according to Michael Parenti, has two basic purposes. The primary function is social and class control, to protect the haves from the have-nots, to maintain the security of those who accumulate wealth from the labor of others, to protect wealth from the poverty that wealth creates, to make sure that there is no reversal from the continual upward distribution of earnings and income from the people who work for wages and salaries to the people who live off dividends, interest, land and mineral royalties and rents, to safeguard against any fundamental reform or revolutionary reversal in regards to which class controls the land, the labor, the markets, and the natural resources in this country and the world. That's Michael Parenti. You say, whoa, that guy's a Marxist. Yes, he's a Marxist. But listen, in political science, the science of politics, it is very well understood and accepted that why states develop. 1689, John Locke, in his second treatise on civil government, points out the great and chief end of men uniting into commonwealths and putting themselves under government is the preservation of their property. 1776, Adam Smith pointed out the necessity of civil government grows with the acquisition of valuable property. Till there be property, there can be no government, the very end of which is to secure wealth and defend the rich from the poor. And as James Madison pointed out at our Constitutional Convention to his fellow conventioneers, the primary purpose of this government is to protect the minority of the opulent from the majority. States develop to protect private property. I mean, you can go back to, you can see primitive versions of this. You can go back to the Bible. King David started out basically as a mafioso with a bunch of thugs protecting landowners who owned more property than they could, handle themselves. This is not, it certainly wasn't a modern state, but you see the beginnings of that. In fact, Engels points out that the first armed bands of men, basically what King David was in the Bible, were retainers to the first big property owners back in the late horticultural societies when men had all this property and they decided they needed someone to protect their property. They began to hire people and give them guns to protect their property. That was the beginning of the state. So the fact is, a complete reversal of what you're saying. We've never seen a state created to protect people or to implement some socialist utopia. I mean, you'll say, oh, the Soviet Union. Soviet Union, they took control over an existing state. Castro took existing over an existing state. Mao took control over an existing state. Our country was created basically out of whole cloth. The conventioneers had their way. Of course they had to, figure out what they wanted to do, but the sky was wide open for them. The reason I bring this stuff up is it's really important to understand, because states develop to protect private property. You're asking this question of how could you have a stateless society without private property? And yet, that is exactly why states have developed, is to protect that private property. Now you say, your question of course is, well, say I decide, I need more land, and it's not me, I'm not going to say, hey, Punk Outlaw, you got too much stuff. Remember, active use is the criteria here. Can you use all that land, Punk Outlaw? Are you actively using it? Or, you said it's not land hoarding. If it's not land hoarding, you're free and clear, brother. Are you actively using it, you know? Or do you have an acre set off to the side there you haven't used for 10 years? And some poor schmuck comes up and says, hey, I could build a house on that land. I could grow peaches and, well, I know market anarchists are fond of apples, so we, you know, poor guy can go trade them for boots or something. But, you know what I'm getting at? Active use. See, the beauty of an anarchist ideal, I think, a socialist anarchist, a libertarian socialist, is that active use. You can only use so much. I don't have to prove. I don't have to say, whoa, Punk Outlaw, you got way too much stuff. I can just go, look, you haven't used that crap in 10 years. You know, you've got 50 bikes back there. You've never ridden a single one of them. Why don't you give those, you know, and you say, oh, but I worked for them. Okay, you worked for them. You know, are you going to use them or not? See, the beauty of active use is you can only use so much stuff. You're only one person. Bill Gates, right now, he's the wealthiest guy in the world. Well, you know, whatever. Maybe he's not. Maybe he's number 2, whatever he is. The guy can still only use the same amount of stuff that me and you can use. You know, he can't ride 5 bikes at once. He can't drive 10 cars at once. You know, and you say, oh, but we're taking. No, because it's a myth. It's just a complete delusion to think that you can own so much stuff. It's a complete delusion. You'd never see this in the animal kingdom. Some bear, you know, trying to control the whole Yosemite Park or, you know, Yellowstone or... Come on. No. You know what the bear can control? What he can actively use. And if he's not there and another bear comes, oh well. You know, this is nature, you know, and the idea that you could own so much stuff, the only way you can own so much stuff, more stuff than you could possibly imagine, is to have bands of armed thugs that will come and protect your property, because you can't do it. See, we don't need bands of armed thugs to, say, take GM, you know, the workers want to take control of that plant. They don't have to do anything to the CEO or the board members or the stockholders. Those people never walk in the plant. They don't have to hit them, punch them, kick them, nothing. Nothing. Think about it. Think about what I'm getting at. Like my job as a carpenter, power tools. Okay, by and large, we don't provide our own power tools. They're owned by the company. Now, if we were to have some kind of general strike, some revolution, that would become my screw gun, my saw, whatever. Okay, and you'd say, but you're taking that away. No, because the guy who really owns those things, he's never touched them once in his life. He never will. It's got my name written on it. Has for, you know, as long as I work for the company. And you could ask anybody in the company, they call it their screw gun, their saw, their this, their that. They see it as their stuff, even though technically under the law it doesn't belong to them. Okay, that's the way our society works. A lot of stuff's owned by people who will never use that stuff. We live in this crazy world where people who do own and control everything buy tools they will never use, buy houses they will never live in, buy cars they will never drive. You know, and the people who can't afford, we rent ourselves out to the people who own all those things in order that we can use those things. Okay? I don't know if I've explained your answer, but the idea that we would need a state or violence to enact this thing is, to my mind, flies in the face of all reality. Because the reason these institutions of violence arose, the church, the state, you name it, was to protect private property. No, when the Christians, early Christians were socialists, by and large, you can read the book of Acts, they held everything in common. When the Christians were like that, they didn't need a state. They didn't need violence. It was completely voluntary. When they started acquiring valuable property, they needed thugs. They needed violence. You need violence to protect property you can't actively use. That's the reality. When you own more stuff than you can use, and you want to use it to exploit others, you need armed bands of thugs to protect that property. So, I hope I answered your question. I'm running out of time, brother. But it's, as always, it's great talking to you, alright? Peace.